Welcome to MAP, the bi-weekly market access podcast provided by Mars Market Access and Pricing Strategy, which is your healthcare consultancy in the German-speaking markets. Mars makes it as easy as possible for you to get your pharmaceutical, medtech, or digital health product to the market and, of course, get the price it deserves. My name is Stefan Walzer. I'm the founder of Mars and a health economist by training and working in the fields of market access, reimbursement, pricing, and health economics already since 2004. Additionally, I have founded the consultancy P&N Pricing and Negotiations in Healthcare based in Toronto, Canada, which supports companies and individuals globally by coaching, simulations, and training, especially on negotiations. This service is including our innovative virtual reality simulation program and is part of the Negotiation Lab. And now let's learn about the market access and reimbursement systems around the globe. Market access across Europe sounds easy maybe, but it is obviously not that easy. We have various processes even within a country and obviously within Europe, even within the European Union, we have at least as many processes as countries. However, soon, in the next 2 years, it will start. There will be, at least on a European level, a joint benefit assessment. How would that look like and what are the bases for that? Ultimately, the so-called UNETA has already been established quite a long time. It was already in 2006 when that joint efforts have been started with various stakeholders from the different countries. Anyhow, it just took until roughly 2 years ago until it was basically announced and then recommended and finally decided by the European Commission that such a European joint assessment will be put into place. When will it start? So ultimately, there's time until 2025 until the different procedural rules will be adopted, needs to be adopted. Then in Q1 2025, there will be the first EU joint HTAs for oncology drugs and ATMPs. In 2028, it will be the first extension where also orphan drugs will need to go through the EU joint HTA. And finally, in 2030, there will be all centrally authorized drugs, which then finally need to go through the EU joint HTA. Anyhow, currently, there are still a lot of questions up there, and not only the methodological guidelines and implementation question, but also around the processes. How would that be implemented? In larger countries like Germany, France, Italy, Spain, maybe where the processes have already been implemented since many, many years, but also in smaller countries such as some of the Eastern Europeans, but also the Nordics, for example, where in some maybe the processes are a bit more, I would call it pragmatic, instead of so rigor as in some of the larger countries. And I'm happy to discuss this today in that episode with Dr. Elvira Mueller. She's vice president at Cetara, and actually she was one of my first bosses when I started in that industry many years ago. So, welcome Elvira to another good podcast discussion. I think the topic has been quite hot at ISPOR in 2022, and you also had a poster presentation on EU joint HTA. So maybe just generally, I'm not sure if there is really any, but are there any kind of hot latest news on EU joint HTA?
Hi, Stefan. Yeah, and thank you for the invite to discuss this very exciting topic, EU joint HTA podcast. I mean, hot topic right now that sticks out is not on my view, but all the activities are focusing on the last 2 years prior to the implementation, and it's a very, very busy period. So, last year a lot of effort went into the development of a lot of guidance documents, methodology, publication, finalization, and that is continuing. I've heard that there's progress on the development on the HTA IT platform, because you need the logistics for the submissions. And most recently, there was a call for stakeholders. So they're building up the stakeholder network, and it's open for applications right now.
Interesting, absolutely. I mean, as you and I know, we currently have individual country submissions in every, let's say, country, obviously, maybe even not only on the national, but sometimes even on a regional, local level, right? So what is your thinking? How could, let's say, an EU joint assessment be potentially implemented in those countries?
Yeah, that's a good question. And as it has been stated, and that's the overall purpose of the EU joint assessment, it should, to some respect, replace what is being submitted in countries, or for those countries who don't have that at all, of course, will be a valuable information tool. And I think in many countries it still has to be figured out how the national process will be adapted, because it's been stated that the national or regional submissions, as you say, should only be of complementary information, meaning, for example, it's needed any clinical additional analysis or specific epidemiologic data referring to the countries. But they must not resubmit the same information that was also part of the submission for the JCA. And so it should not be a doubling of the effort. And so the HTA bodies are required to consider the outcome of the joint assessment in their evaluation. And together with the clinical and non-clinical information, of course, economic data, etc., would be separately be submitted, then be part of the conclusions, the appraisal on the national level. So it's very exciting to see how that will be then. That's a statement, but how will it come into practice? I think for many countries that is not yet properly defined, and so that will also be part of the 2 years ahead.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm still a bit skeptical, let's say, about generally the process. I think the idea is logic from a European perspective, I think, no doubt. But I think I still do not yet see at least how this could be really implemented. I think you raised already the point, like epidemiology and cost, etc. Let's say if we transfer that maybe into a German context, this is probably the kind of module 3, right? Where you have the very German specific stuff in there. And then the kind of key question is basically, what else would you need to, let's say, submit in the clinical chapter, right?
Yeah.
I mean, what if you suddenly have, let's say, another subpopulation? Think about diabetes, right? Where we have had so many different, let's say, let's call it maybe niche in Germany to be submitted, right? Or maybe a very tricky one where I don't know whether we can maybe come up with a solution here. But if I would think of, for example, not submitting one of the statistical measures like a relative risk for an endpoint, is that already something where the GBA would say it is not completely submitted to the European or at the European level, hence you need to still again resubmit everything to us? I mean, you see, I still see a couple of, let's say, issues. I don't know what your thoughts about that are.
My personal thinking about that is that you would submit these analyses, but refer to the data. I mean, you have the CSR and all the data already submitted to the JCA. So I would think you have to do these analyses and submit them, but not again all the workup around it. Describe the you should describe the methodology for that specific item, and then, of course, the results. The difficulty I see is also for the manufacturer. You know, when you submit a dossier for reimbursement, you have your storyline, you have what you bring forward as a value and how the evidence falls into it. And now you need to refer on one side to the JCA or the previously your dossier previously submitted and the JCA, but also then the additional data, and out of that make, let's say, again, a joint submission. And I think that might take more time and more effort than is currently on the radar for many, so that maybe some national submissions may be delayed because they have to wait for the outcome of the JCA. They need to then amend it and then find their, let's say, way of presenting the data nationally.
Yeah, I think you're bringing up an interesting point as well. I mean, I had a discussion some months ago with a Canadian expert. And I mean, as you might know, I mean, they have as well, I think they just moved their, let's call it a national, more from regional perspective, into a Canadian kind of system a couple of years ago, right? So I thought, you know, a very much similar kind of role model maybe for Europe in a way, right? Yeah. And what they also have is basically an opt-out opportunity for manufacturers. Oh, but I think that's not foreseen in Europe, right? Because you just mentioned you need to wait. And I mean, to as well add again my skeptical point of view, if we see how fast, let's say, processes work on a European level, and just maybe compare that to, I think, still the quite efficient AMNOG process, I'm quite skeptical.
Well, concerning the timelines, I wouldn't be that skeptical because, you know, there was this 15 years of pilot period, all the UNETA activities, the pilot projects, etc., and where they had enough time to get familiar what is possible, what is not possible, and can we publish the report in due time as planned. Currently, there are again a few pilot ongoing, and I think the timing of the JCA will be as planned. Currently, I think the main critical point are the resources and the expertise that they need on a greater scale, but they are aligned about how it should be done and what are the legal prerequisites, etc. So they're used to this collaboration and the timing. What could happen, and I hope it will not happen too often, if the regulatory label is not as anticipated, but includes a change, and then it might infect the PICO, anything else, then it will be a delay. But from the process as thought, I think they had enough time to work this out. I'm not a optimistic person.
You know, I mean, as said, I think the general idea makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I think we just need to see how it might be implemented. And I think, to be also fair, I mean, besides my skeptical point of view, which is probably more driven by the German perspective, I think it might probably help for a good number of countries where maybe processes are not yet that well established, like in Germany, like in France, like in Italy, or which just do not have the resources in general, right?
Definitely, I fully agree. And I even had heard most recently a representative of an Eastern European HTA body that they are very much looking forward to it, because knowing that many smaller countries do not have the capacities, they do not have a system in place, and what they are hoping for is that it will really help to bring forward an early access or more earlier access to the patients, and to help a reasonable decision making, what will be reimbursed and what not, and thus grant also in other countries a much faster access to new treatments than it's currently the case. And so I think many countries will benefit from it. And in the long run, I think it will be, like many things, like even the AMNOG, it will be evolving with some adaptations, changes, and but will lead to, let's say, I think, more uniform assessment, and then hopefully more uniform appraisal, because that is some of my concerns, that you have a uniform assessment, but then the appraisal and the added value still be done on the country level. And although you have the same data, you come to different conclusions. So that's where I see some drawbacks. So I'm not sure how you see it, but it's where I'm still thinking, how will that then be justifiable?
Yeah, I agree, and I think the most prominent example is probably again diabetes, right? I mean, without knowing all of the details, right? But just comparing, let's say, which products are available, especially the last, or let's say the latest, newest anti-diabetes type 2 drugs. I think there are many more available in France, for example, in comparison to Germany, where it was a big fight even to get at least one or the other for a small subgroup for still, I would say, a challenging price in Germany. And I think the question is probably rather, currently it's maybe not that visible to everybody, right? Because it just might take time. Then you have it very national here and very national there. But now you might have at least the assessment on a European level. But still, I think if I could just maybe take that a bit further, the assessment generally is being done on a European level, right? But a decision, and finally, if you turn that into a benefit or added benefit level, this is also done nationally, right? So it's just being said, these are the data, these are the results, and then it's a full stop, right? And then you turn it basically into the national systems, and they then just say thumbs up or down or whatever.
Exactly. Right? Yeah. And it's not like the regulatory decision on the European level. It's different.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the budget is the responsibility of the individual countries, at least still in healthcare, right?
Yeah. I think that was a prerequisite of the member states to buy into the whole process.
No, fully agree. I mean, if I maybe turn my skeptical point of view maybe into more positive, would you think that the GBA would suddenly accept also other evidences, like suddenly indirect treatment comparisons or other evidence levels from clinical trials, knowing that indirect treatment comparisons are theoretically be accepted, but we all know that it's just rarely really been accepted by the GBA/EQUIC so far, right?
Yeah, that's why I wouldn't call it suddenly.
Okay, take that word out.
Yeah. But the issue is, and will be the same, I assume, with the GBA/EQUIC accepting ITC. They very, very strongly look at the methodology and the data, and if there's a little bit of non-fulfillment of statistical requirements, then it's not accepted. And if you look at the documents and the direct and indirect comparison, and which came out in December, and then the methodology guideline, it's very, very similar, I would say, so concerning using fixed or random effects approach, Bucher methodology, and under which circumstances NMA would be accepted or which NMA methodology would not be accepted, and of course, the underlying assumptions, homogeneity, etc. And I think it will strongly depend on the data available, which has been and will be a problem as before. I mean, that you do an indirect comparison because you don't have head-to-head, and then you are forced to use what's published and then try to find as best as possible matching populations. And there are some drawbacks to that, of course, and that's why all these methodologies have been developed. And yeah, it's really that's where I'm skeptical as well, whether all the efforts will be in the end then be accepted. Although, there were many countries involved in the development, and I think one of the lead countries was Ireland, and in France, and in Germany was involved. So hopefully it will lead to a fair evaluation of these other evidence. And there's also mentioning of real-world evidence when and in what circumstance it can be used. So perhaps we should be hoping that they will bring forward the use of other data, as you say, also in Germany.
Yes, perfect. Yeah, I think a lot of different, let's say, opportunities, I would still say, but also still some, let's say, issues to be solved. I think another point I would maybe quickly discuss with you is consultations. I mean, in Germany, I think we all know that we can consult the GBA basically whenever you want, given the time slots available, for sure. Very similar to the UK NICE, right? Even though that they are no more part of the EU. But also in some other countries, there's the opportunity. If we would take the chance and say EU joint HTA will more or less rule at least the first part, or maybe in some countries, the whole kind of benefit process, I would rather want, if I would be a manufacturer, I would rather want to discuss with somebody on an EU joint HTA level the submission requirements. Is there anything available, or is it rather still go to Germany, go to Italy, go to France, and think and try to think and anticipate what might be needed on a European level?
I think that is kind of really a drawback and missing item in the whole process. And it has been also communicated, especially by the manufacturers several times. And even if you compare the procedure versus the UNETA trial projects, there is not even the opportunity to discuss the evidence and everything at a scoping meeting like it was then. The manufacturer is when the PICO is developed, when all the scope is set, he has no exchange with the authorities. And that, I think, first of all, I'm surprised that it is not the case. And secondly, I think that is a drawback, because it's any of these submissions and assessments, it should be really collaboration between the authorities and the manufacturers. And to my knowledge, there is no consultation in any way planned for now. A part of course, which is a different topic, the joint scientific consultation for trial planning, but this is something different. But as you say, in many countries, you can reach out, and the authorities even like that, or also Germany says, yes, please come even earlier for discussion, so we know what's coming up, and then you see our point, etc. And at the moment, I don't see that this is the case, and that is kind of the requirements are kind of a black box for the manufacturer until you are communicated. Of course, you can think ahead yourself, but this is really, I think, an item that is missing in the whole process.
Yeah, interesting. So another potential issue, which we might have brought up. To conclude a bit, I'm pretty much sure, and I think both of us have just as well discussed that in the last couple of minutes before we have gone into the recording, is that the big companies, they're basically quite well prepared. Some have even, let's say, directly implemented, let's say, departments or at least responsible persons. But if I would think about the smaller or the mid-sized companies, maybe, and especially not located in Europe, what would be your kind of recommendation if you would say EU joint HTA will be a reality anyway, so it will come. So what would be your recommendation that they would still be, let's say, well prepared whenever they would enter Europe?
Yeah, first of all, if they have not started yet, start now. It sounds 2 years sounds long, but it's not. They should get prepared in different ways. First of all, from their company set up, they need someone being responsible for it. They need to consider how practically do this, who has a lead, who has a responsibility, how do they work together with affiliates, how do they have the knowledge to prepare these dossiers, do they need to outsource, and what is their pipeline, what will be first, etc. And then also have, especially if they are not represented in the EU, have a reliable partner, they can work on that. And so that they are not out of a sudden need to submit a dossier, and they should not underestimate what it entails. So it's not a value dossier, it's very comprehensive, it's very science-driven, we discussed methodology, and it needs really expertise to compile this in a complete and in a very concise and appropriate manner.
Yes, I think that was a good conclusion. So start now. If you have a launch planned, at least in the next 2 to 3 years, because as you said, it is complex. It's not getting easier, and we still have some issues which have not yet been solved, at least on a European level. Thank you, Elvira.
Yeah, thank you, Stefan.
So still a couple of question marks, I would say, also after the very nice and lively discussion with Elvira from Zatara, where I think we try to find the pathways how to, let's say, or how could we potentially then see the implementation of EU joint HTA in the next couple of years. I think there are still a lot of question marks, for example, on the consultation side. How could companies prepare themselves optimally before they would even submit? Currently, there are no such kind of consultation available on that level. So currently, it would mean that companies would need to still go into the detailed country-specific consultations and then try to, I would say, make up their mind how the EU joint HTA would look like. If that would potentially change in the future as well, needs to be seen. The other point is obviously where I think we have had different perspectives from a timing side. What if a company has maybe provided too late the information to the centralized body running the assessment on a European level? How would that look like? Could the EU joint HTA then still be done in the given time? What if suddenly another comparator would come to the game, and so on? I think ultimately it's still also then the question, how detailed, also from a legal perspective, would a completeness on a European level be seen from a national perspective? Meaning, especially when thinking about maybe some very specific things like given statistical measures such as risk, relative risk or odds ratios, for example, which need to be provided in the German context, which might maybe not be provided on a European level perspective. The other question is still, as some HTA authorities, for example, also foresee a maximum time since the systematic literature search has been performed. In Germany, 3 months. I think in a couple of other countries, it's 6 months. What if the EU joint HTA was submitted and then the assessment on a national side would just start then, for example, 7 months later? Hence, the systematic literature search would also then no more apply. And hence, that would potentially also mean to run again not only the literature search, but for example, also a network meta-analysis or an indirect treatment comparison. A lot of questions still ongoing. Anyway, we're now in 2023. We should expect to have some more details from a methodological perspective. But I think even more important from a procedural perspective, I would say this year, latest next year, because obviously in 2025, the EU joint HTA will be implemented, at least for some parts of the industry. And I think very important what also Elvira concluded, and I can only agree, whoever would be affected by the EU joint HTA in 2025, so oncology and ATMP products, should already start thinking about that first step before we would go into national submission. That was an episode of MAP, the market access podcast provided by Mars Market Access and Pricing Strategy, which is your healthcare consultancy in the German-speaking markets. MAP is available every second week with a new episode, so watch out. And in case you might have questions, contact me directly and or visit our website on www.marketaccess-pricingstrategy.de.